Good morning. I have a picture that I want to show you. For the last 25 years, the guy you see on the screen, Matt Emmons, has been one of the top performers in the world of competitive shooting, including the Summer Olympics in 2004, 2008, 2012, and 2016. The main event in which he competes is something called the 50-meter rifle prone. It's an event in which each shooter fires 60 rounds from a .22 rifle 50 meters away from a prone position, which 50 meters is a little over half of a football field. Back in 2024, during his first Olympic Games, the 2 days after winning the gold medal in the 50-meter rifle prone event, he entered a second event in which instead of shooting from a prone position, you shoot from 3 different positions. As the event unfolded, he as expected, did really well. And by the time they got down to the final round, he had a 3-point lead, which in the world of competitive shooting is seen as an almost insurmountable lead. All he had to do to win the event and secure his second gold medal of the 2004 Olympics was simply hit the target. Didn't have to hit the bullseye. Anywhere on the paper would have been good enough to win the event and secure his second gold medal. When the moment for his final shot came, he did what he always does. He went through his pre-shot routine. He carefully locked on the target. He exhaled one last time and then slowly squeezed the trigger. And as the bullet left the gun, it was a near perfect shot, just a few millimeters to the left from the bullseye. As he saw where his bullet hit the target, he felt the joy of victory start to wash over him. But then he slowly started to sense that something was wrong. As he pulled back from his gun, it was just a few seconds later that one of the judges came over and informed him that for the first time in his career, he had committed what's called a cross-target violation, meaning that he had hit the bullseye on the wrong target. He was subsequently given a 0 for his last shot. Instead of winning a gold medal, he had to settle for 8th place. Do you know it's possible to hit exactly what you're aiming at and still miss everything? A clearly frustrated Matt Emmons told The Guardian magazine after the competition, "I didn't look at the number above the target before the last shot. I usually always look through the scope at the number first and then drop down to the target, but for some reason, I didn't do it this time." As I was reading that story, it occurred to me that what happened to Matt Emmons can sometimes happen to all of us. We can wind up hitting the bullseye on the wrong targets. Or as you go through life, you can spend your life chasing a target that's undefined. But if you want to hit the right target, you have to know what you're aiming at. And you have to make sure that you're aiming at the right thing. If you have your Bible or your phone with you, I want you to turn to Matthew chapter 20. For the last few weeks, we've been in this series that Anita mentioned called Family Fix-Up. And today we're going to talk about something that I think is especially appropriate for this weekend because it's something that all of us struggle with. It just comes natural to us, and it starts out when you're a child. Have you ever noticed, and if you're a parent or a grandparent, I'm sure you have you ever noticed how you don't have to teach a child to be selfish? It just sort of comes natural to us. And what happens is if you don't battle against that when you're younger, it only grows worse as you get older. Think about it like this. How many people do you know who live their life as if they're the star of some movie that's being developed, that's being written before they speak, and everybody else in their life is sort of the supporting role, in a supporting role? And what happens is if that goes on long enough and if enough people act like that, things start to very quickly unravel. And some of you have experienced that. But what if it wasn't that way? What if there was a way that all of us could learn to be just a little less selfish and a little more selfless? Do you think that would help your relationships with the people closest to you? During our time together in this series, we've been focused on Jesus' relationships with the 12 men, we call them the 12 disciples, who essentially functioned as his family during this 3-year period that we call his public ministry. And by the time you get to Matthew chapter 20, the disciples have now been with Jesus for nearly 3 full years. They've traveled with him, they've ate their meals with him, and they've experienced some incredible things with him. But just like your family, after you spend so much time together, it was inevitable that they would start to get on each other's nerves. They've had some pretty serious disagreements along the way. And if you go back and you read through the Gospels, there was one argument in particular that kept coming up over and over and over again. Just to set the context of what we're going to read, I want you to look at verse 17 of Matthew chapter 20. Now Jesus was going up to Jerusalem, and on the way, he took the 12 aside and said to them, "We're going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and the teachers of the law. They will condemn him to death and will hand him over to the Gentiles to be mocked and flogged and crucified. And on the third day, he'll be raised to life." So by this point, Jesus is doing everything he possibly can to prepare these guys for what he knows is about to happen once they reach Jerusalem. He wants them to know, hey, things have been great. We've had an incredible 3 years, but things are not always going to be great because something's getting ready to happen, and there's going to be some really hard days ahead for you guys. But then when you get to verse 20, there is a new character that enters the conversation. We don't know how long she's been there. We don't know how long she's been listening in, but we do know by the questions she asked that however long she's been there, she and her two sons, James and John, have completely missed the point of what Jesus has been saying. Check this out in verse 20. Then the mother of Zebedee's sons came to Jesus with her sons and kneeling down asked a favor of him. "What is it you want?" he asked. She said, "Grant that one of these two sons of mine may sit at your right and the other at your left in your kingdom." Now, in addition to being called the sons of Zebedee, James and John are sometimes called the sons of thunder. Kind of sounds like tag team wrestlers. And it's an indication these guys come from a family of big personalities, and they've got big personalities. And you read this story, and it makes you wonder if maybe they didn't inherit some of that, at least from their mother. Now, we don't know much about her. There's some evidence that maybe she was one of Jesus' aunts, but wherever she came from, whatever her background was, we know that when it came to her kids, when it came to her two sons, James and John, she had a target in mind. There was something that she wanted them to experience, and she was not afraid to go after it so that she could secure it for them. And if you're a parent or a grandparent, you can identify with that because you've already got this list of things somewhere in the back of your mind of things that you hope your kids experience. You want them to score the most points, have the highest GPA, get the best scholarship, go to the best school, make the honor roll, get out, land the perfect job with the perfect company, make the most money, live in the nicest house, drive the newest car, settle down and get married, have kids of their own so that you can start over with your grandkids. I mean, all of us have these dreams. All of us have these targets in mind. And she was no different. She thinks that as they're heading towards Jerusalem, that they're moving towards an inauguration. And she wants her two sons to play a starring role in whatever's about to happen. But then you get to verse 22, and I want you to look at how Jesus answers her question. "You don't know what you're asking," Jesus said to them. "Can you drink the cup that I'm about to drink?" "We can," they answered. Notice that they answered, not just their mom. Let you know they were all in this together. Jesus said to them, "You will indeed drink from my cup, but to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared by my Father." It's clear as you read through this story that these two brothers and their mother had a target in mind. And yet, according to Jesus, they're aiming at the wrong target. They're worried about status and significance and success when Jesus is worried about service and what they can give. And then you get down to verse 24. When the 10 heard about this, talking about the other guys, they were indignant with the two brothers. Now, anytime you've got a group of people, any size, if there's more than one person in the room, somebody's going to be jockeying for position. That's what we do. We love to compete against one another. We love to know, who's the most important, who's the best looking, who's got the most power, who's got the most friends on Facebook, who gets the most likes on Instagram. We love to measure ourselves against one another, and that's what these guys are doing. So Jesus understands what's happening, and he calls a family meeting together. And he wants to call everybody together to tell them something that he's already told them over and over and over again. Check out verse 25. Jesus called them together and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. According to Jesus, there are three key choices that all of us can make that can help us be a little less selfish and a little more selfless in our relationships. Here's the first one. Jesus said, make sure you always choose people over positions. See, the question that this mother in the story asked underscored the fact that she was worried about securing a coveted position for her two sons. In her mind, this is probably something they'd earned. I mean, 3 years earlier, they left everything. They followed Jesus. They've been with him now all this time. They've done some really good things. They've done the right things, and it only makes sense in her mind that now it's time for them to be promoted. Because that's what happens. You get the job, you work hard, you do a good job, and eventually you get promoted. So even though she realizes and everybody realizes, hey, Jesus is the king, and when this thing happens, he's going to have like the penthouse office, she's at least hoping that her two sons will at least get corner offices, and Jesus is the king. Maybe they can be the vice kings. But that's not what Jesus had in mind. Rather than obsessing over who would fill what positions, he's focused on modeling what it means to serve the people around you. And I'm afraid that most of the time, most of us get this backward. Just think back over your own life. If you could somehow come up with an accurate measurement, do you think you've spent more time chasing after positions or investing in the people closest to you? When I use that word position, I don't mean just a job title. I mean, everybody does that. I'm talking about anything. It could be anything. It could be a certain net worth, a certain number in your bank account, a house with a certain number of square feet, a car that's newer than everybody else's car. I mean, it could be, everybody's got their list of things that they're chasing after. And if we were honest, some of us would have to admit that we've spent more time chasing positions and certain possessions than we have investing in people. A couple years ago, there was a study completed by researchers at Harvard University. And they went back and they retested something that's been demonstrated over and over again in numerous studies over the last few decades. And the reason they went back and retested it is because everybody that reads this has a hard time believing it. It goes against everything we think we know. But they went back and they retested it. Sure enough, here's what they found. According to their research, once you reach a certain household income, now not just your income, but a household income, which they identified as being right around $105,000 a year, once you reach a certain household income, as your income increases after that point, your life satisfaction and your sense of well-being actually decreases. Your income goes up and your satisfaction with your life goes down. It's like the notorious philosopher, the notorious B.I.G. said, the more money we have, the more problems we see. Some of you know exactly. Don't look that up later. Don't write me a note. But you know what I'm saying. I mean, the money goes up, the problems increase, the stress goes up, and our level of life satisfaction goes down. But it's not just adults either. Listen to what they said. According to their researchers, quote, children from affluent families are more likely to suffer from depression, anxiety, and substance abuse than those who come from less affluent families. Now again, that goes against most of what we think we know. We think if I just had more money, if I just had better stuff, if I just had a bigger house, our family would be closer together and everything, we'd live happily ever after. But every study that comes out says that's not how it works. Dr. Elizabeth Lombardo, who led the study, called this the treadmill effect. She said, we're always looking for more. And then when we finally get it and it fails to satisfy us, we immediately start thinking, what's next? It's like we never get off the treadmill. Listen to her words. She said, there is a huge body of research that shows that material possessions don't make us happier. Instead, it's things like experiences and having more time to spend with the people we love that drives happiness. Again and again, we found that the deepest pleasures are derived from interpersonal love, warm relationships, giving, appreciation, and gratitude. It wasn't long after that study was completed that the New York Times ran a front page article with the headline, "Wealthy, Successful, and Miserable." And in the article, they told the stories of several graduates from the Harvard Business School who had achieved incredible things in their professional lives only to watch their personal lives disintegrate. These are people who hit the target in their professional lives and then figured out they were aiming at the wrong target. And the positions that they thought would bring them success and bring them happiness instead wreaked havoc on their relationships with the people closest to them. It's especially important you get this right if you're a parent. I want you to listen to these words from Tim Kimmel. He said, "Even with the disappointments, raising children is still the greatest thing you'll do. It's greater than any milestone you can hit in your career. It dwarfs any fame you may receive for your ideas or your inventions. You've been handed a piece of history in advance, a gracious gift that you will send to a time you will not see. And you play the biggest role in how that history will ultimately be recorded." If you want to improve your relationships with the people closest to you, one simple way to do that is to spend more time investing in them than you do chasing positions and possessions. Here's a second choice that has to be made. In every situation, choose to exalt others and humble yourself. Now you get down to verse 25. Jesus talks about how leaders love to exercise authority over the people that are under them. In the first century, they were living in a culture in which titles and positions were a really big deal. I mean, everybody wants to know where do they fall in the pecking order and who are they more important than and all that stuff. And you may work in an environment in which that's the way it goes. Everybody's always comparing themselves. Who's got the biggest office? Who makes the most money? Who gets the last word at the meetings? But then you get to verse 26, and Jesus says something that once again goes against everything we think we know about leadership. Listen to how he says this, verse 26. "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them." But then check this out. He says, "Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant." Now, I want you to underline or circle or highlight that word "great" in your Bible or on your phone, because if you're a parent, my suspicion is this is one of the targets that you already have in mind for your kids. You want your kids or your grandkids to be great at something. And maybe you already know what it is. Maybe you want them to be a great athlete, so you spend all this time and all this money, get them to the right coaches and the right trainers because you want them to be great. Or maybe you want them to, there's a certain job you want them to have, and you know they've got to have a certain grade point average to get that job, to get into that school, and so you're always breathing down their neck trying to check their grades. Or maybe you don't have it planned out at all. Maybe you know what it is, maybe you don't, but you just know that you want your kids to do something great. You want them to be the kind of person that when they walk in a room, everybody turns and notices because they're great. But if you look closely at what Jesus said here, you'll find that he uses two words that we don't normally associate with the idea of greatness. The first word he uses is the word servant. Whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. And then just to make sure we don't miss the point of what he's saying, he follows it up with an even stronger word when he uses the word slave. Whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Now again, that goes against everything we think we know about greatness, right? In our minds, we think somebody that's great is somebody that has servants. But Jesus said the person that's great is the person that is the servant. He says that the path toward greatness is the path of servanthood. That's why in Romans 12, the Apostle Paul said, "Be devoted to one another in love, honor one another above yourselves." Honor one another above yourselves. Let me give you a really practical way you can live this out. And I'm going to say it twice because it's going to be hard for some of us, all right? It's a mindset that all of us can adopt right now that will change and improve your closest relationships almost immediately. Here it is. The next room you walk into, just assume that the other people in the room are more important than you are. Let me say it again, because some of you are going to choke on that, so I want to make sure you get it. The next room you walk into, wherever it is, your school, your classroom, your living room, whatever room you're going into, just assume that the other people in the room are more important than you are. Now, I know that's hard for some of us because some of us have bought into this idea, hey, I'm the star of the show. This movie's about me. I'm the most interesting. I'm the smartest person ever. But I just adopt the mindset, even if it's not true, just adopt the mindset that everybody else in the room is more important than you are, and there'll be some incredible things that start to happen. All of a sudden, you'll start to listen more than you talk. And all of a sudden, when you walk in that room and you see the other people and you assume that they're more important than you are, you'll start to look for ways to serve them rather than demanding that they serve you. And if you'll just adopt that mindset that you're the least important person in every room you walk into, I'm telling you, man, it'll change everything. The great conductor, Leonard Bernstein, was once asked in an interview, said, what's the hardest instrument to play in an orchestra? And without hesitation, he said, second fiddle. And he went on, he said, I can always get plenty of first violinists, but to find someone who plays second fiddle with as much enthusiasm, now that's a challenge. And Jesus said, if you want to achieve true greatness, you're going to have to get comfortable playing second fiddle instead of always chasing the spotlight. Now, there's one more choice that has to be made. Here it is. In every situation, you choose to give more than you take. In verse 28, Jesus invites all of us as his followers to look to him as the example of how to live this out. And when you think about it, I mean, even from a historical perspective, even if you don't necessarily believe in Jesus, you have to admit he's the most important person that ever walked this earth. Never been anybody that had the impact. I mean, if you tried to trace the impact of his short life on the civilization and the centuries that followed, you'd be overwhelmed. Nobody was as important as Jesus, and yet he lived his life in a way in which he always gave more than he took. He always served rather than demanding to be served. And even though he's the most important person that ever walked the earth, he gets to the end of his life and he says he's going to give his life as a ransom for many. He chose to give up his life so that sinful, undeserving, messed up people just like us could experience new life. And in doing so, he becomes the model of what it means to give yourself to others. Now, here's what I really wanted to get to. The rest of that was just the introduction. Don't panic. One question. Throughout this series, we've said, here's these 12 guys. They've been Jesus' family during this 3-year period we call his public ministry. And so every day for 3 years, Jesus modeled what this is supposed to look like. I mean, if they wanted to see what it looked like to be truly great, if they wanted to see what it looked like to be a servant, they had a front row seat. All they had to do was look at Jesus. Now here's the question. Who is modeling this for your family? I mean, all they had to do was look at Jesus, but who are your kids and your grandkids supposed to look at? And before you make that too complicated, let me help you with the answer. The answer is, it's you. I mean, if you want somebody to model this for your kids, the only person in a position to do this is you. But here's what happens. There's a part of you that hears that, or some of, earlier in the service, you hear Austin stand up here and the parents make these pledges, and you hear that some of you went through that years ago, and you think, I'm not sure I've done a very good job. You think, I made these pledges, but I'm not sure I've modeled this very well. And so there's a part of you that maybe feels a little bit guilty, and you wonder, what am I supposed to do now? I have another picture I want to show you. After his famous mess up at the 2004 Olympics, Matt Emmons returned in 2008, the Beijing Olympics, and he comes down to the final shot. He's in one more position to secure that coveted gold medal. It comes down to that final shot, and he's getting ready to turn his gun toward the target. And for some reason, his finger twitches, and he pulls the trigger, and the bullet it comes out of the gun, and he misses the target completely. And instead of getting the gold medal, he finishes in 4th place. After that, every time he goes to a press conference, what do you think the first 2 questions are? How's it feel to mess up so publicly? In the two biggest moments of your life, what do? To make it worse, 2 years later, 2010, he's diagnosed with thyroid cancer. Most people assume, hey, that'll be the end of his career. It's not. He recovers. He comes back in the 2012 Olympics in London, England, gets down to the final shot. And this time, everything goes smoothly. The gun doesn't malfunction. His finger doesn't twitch. He's aimed at the right target. And unthinkably, he misses on the last shot. One of the greatest shooters in history misses the target. Now, the tendency is, you hear all that and you think, well, this guy must not be very good. If you look up his record and you go back and you talk to people who live in that world of competitive shooting, Matt Emmons is one of the top 5 shooters in history. It's just that there were some high-profile moments that happened to come at the Olympics when things just didn't go well. And some of you know what that's like. Some of you know what it's like to have some pretty dramatic moments where things didn't go well. If we were to go in the room, I mean, some of us could tell stories about ways in which we've messed up in big moments that would just blow everybody's mind. And you feel the weight of what it feels like to have failed and to have messed up. Now, fast forward to September of 2019. I've got one more picture I want to show you. That was when at the age of 38, which is old for an Olympic athlete, but not old for the world of competitive shooting. At the age of 38, Matt Emmons stunningly retired from competitive shooting. And even though he was still considered one of the top 5 shooters of all time and certainly one of the top shooters in 2019, and even though it was assumed that he still had several years left in the prime of his career, he chose to walk away from all that. And in his announcement, he said these words. He said, "The time has come to announce my retirement from shooting as an athlete. The picture here shows not only my international medals, but more importantly, my family." He goes on to explain how instead of traveling the world, instead of chasing medals, instead of trying to fill up a trophy case that will one day collect dust and people will sell at a yard sale, instead of spending his life chasing temporary success, he decided he was going to spend the next season of his life investing in permanent relationships with the people closest to him. Why? Why did Matt Emmons retire when he was at the top of his game and what could have been the prime of his career? He retired because for him, the target changed. And what about you? I want you to stand with me. I know there's some of you here this morning, some were here in the first service, and you feel like, hey, I've been aiming at the wrong target. But here's the deal. Even if you hit the target, if it's the wrong target, you don't gain anything. You can hit exactly what you're aiming at and still miss everything. That's why it's important in moments like these and periods of your life where you step back from all of that, you step back from all the targets you've been chasing, and you look in the mirror and you ask yourself, do I need to make sure that I'm lined up at the right target? See, before you pull the trigger, before you get to the end, you need to make sure that you're aiming in the right direction. And you don't just do this for yourself. In fact, you don't do this at all for yourself. You do this for your kids because they're going to follow your direction. So if you're here this morning and you need to refocus on the right target, we'd love to help you. Dave and I will be here. You come down, we'll pray with you. We'll be here after the service. Be glad to talk with you. Be glad to pray with you. But whatever you do, don't spend your life hitting targets that don't gain you anything.